It's been a week of confusion, not to say downright fabrication, surrounding the whereabouts of an American warship which had been reported heading for the Korean Peninsula. What's behind the misinformation that was given out to the world? The Chinese government has for the first time published guidelines mapping out the standards for the administration of hospices. What major changes can we expect these to bring about? Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu Xin. To start things off, Federica Mogherini, the EU's foreign affairs representative and vice president of the European Commission, is in Beijing to co-chair the 7th EU-China strategic dialogue with State Councillor Yang Jiechi, China's top diplomat. This meeting is aimed at laying the groundwork for the next EU-China summit scheduled for June in Brussels. The two sides are expected to discuss cooperation on global challenges such as climate change, as well as regional and security issues. Mogherini said ahead of her visit that cooperation between the EU and China had never been so important as multilateral global governance is open to doubt. She added that the EU and China share a common view of a global order based on multilateralism and on the UN system. She said she doesn't share the concerns expressed by some people about a more confident and outward-looking China, adding that China can play a very positive role in so many areas and Europeans were ready to step up cooperation. Mogherini also supported the concept of a community of common destiny for mankind espoused by Chinese leaders, particularly a quest for mutually beneficial solutions among equal partners. With negotiations over Brexit and many other challenges facing Europe, the timing of this visit couldn't be better. So all the signs are good that relations between China and the EU can only be more steady in the foreseeable future, providing much needed certainty at a time of uncertainty. If you've been watching the news lately, it's been a scary week on the Korean Peninsula. Amid heightened tensions, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea held a massive military parade, flubbed a missile test and threatened nuclear war with the United States. Meanwhile, on the other side, international media have widely reported an aircraft carrier strike group, the Carl Vinson, was ordered to head for the waters off the Korean Peninsula. In an interesting twist of events, however, the latest information from the Pentagon indicates that the Carl Vinson carrier was heading in the opposite direction on Saturday, 8th of April, from Singapore to the southwest to the Indian Ocean. It joined Australian forces for an exercise last Saturday. During that whole week, the carrier was over 5,000 kilometers away from the peninsula and is only now on its way. House said on Tuesday that the wrong information came from the Pacific Fleet of the U.S. When the tension was high on the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. Army would look weak if they came out to clarify the truth. Hence the delay till now. Was the Carl Vinson story a deliberate deception by U.S. officials, and was the Western media complicit in this? Joining me from London is James Hall, an associate fellow at Chatham House. Mr. Hall, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, what is your impression upon hearing the twist of things? Do you think the Carl Vinson storyline was misunderstanding, or is it part of U.S. playing psychological warfare or bluffing?
I suspect it's more the latter. It's a bit of psychological warfare. The Carl Vinson had been in Korean waters earlier on, at the beginning, I believe, of the current US-South Korean exercises, which are an annual event, and then was moved off to Singapore. And the announcement at first was that it was going to Australia, and then people said, well, no, it's going to Korea. Now, that might have been a mistake, I suppose. It might have been disinformation, but it might also have been a combination of all those things, that somebody had decided that it would be a good thing to put more pressure on North Korea by moving this collection of ships towards the Korean coast. And you will remember that the President, Mr. Trump, talked about an armada going to Korea. But in the past too, the United States has done this sort of thing. Something similar, not quite the same, but something similar happened a couple of years back when tension got very high at the same period. And then aeroplanes were to be moved to the mainland, from the mainland United States, or from Guam, I can't remember which now, towards Korean Peninsula. There was much international concern at this, and then the planes went away again. So it fits in with not being quite sure what to do, but thinking you should do something, perhaps.
Well, originally, the Public Affairs Office of the Navy's Third Fleet said Pacific Commander Admiral Harry Harris Jr. ordered the Carl Vinson to leave Singapore and to sail to West Pacific towards the Korean Peninsula. However, the latest information released by the U.S. Navy indicates that the aircraft carrier transiting the Sunda Strait in Indonesian waters, that is about 5,000 kilometers away from the Korean Peninsula. Now, in response, many South Korean and Japanese news media, as well as the New York Times, reported Harris's order as evidence that the crisis was intensifying. What do you think of the behavior of the media? I mean, nobody really went about to check this news because they thought it was really true, and they just reported that and really blew the situation to a much bigger portion.
Yes, I think part of the problem is that journalists don't necessarily have much opportunity to question military statements, and the idea that the Admiral would do this sort of very significant thing without instructions from the President seems, or from the White House in some form or other, seems unlikely. So, but it may have been that as the Carl Vinson and its escort ships were going to take part in an exercise, complete the exercise, and then go to Korea. After all, that the tension wasn't going to go away immediately. I mean, the tension will last certainly as long as the exercises last. It does every year. But whether it was deliberate or whether it was somebody mistaking orders or what, I really don't know, and I don't suppose anybody ever will. Trouble is with the media, I'm sorry about this, is that quite often
we also be careful,
story,
true.
And they run it, never exactly getting it completely wrong, but sometimes getting it, shall we say, slightly distorted, and I suspect something like that may have happened in this case. I think many of us were fooled, not just the media. We thought that really the United States was ratcheting up the pressure on North Korea. Which would fit in with the way the two sides behaved during this period.
Now,
we all got it wrong, I think.
For now. Now, some have argued that there has been no change in actual substance of Trump's DPRK policy. Announcement of an aircraft carrier heading your way certainly sends a message that no amount of belligerent late-night twist can. When the announcement proves to be a series of confusion, can the DPRK or the rest of the world really take U.S. threats seriously in the future? Or will we always be fooled?
I don't know about being fooled, but I think one should always be very careful about the high rhetoric that goes on. The North Koreans, as you know, are past masters at over-exaggerating their language, using language that sounds really very belligerent. And every act that they disagree with is an act of war, or a warlike situation has arisen. You have to do a certain amount of discounting from that.
Yeah.
I think you maybe also have to do some discounting from the way the current administration in the United States presents things. It's different from the measured tones of the past. It's much more a personal reaction from the president, and then people have to handle that.
Sure.
Without actually saying we're not doing that.
Yeah. However, the situation has also been kind of used by other countries in that region. For instance, Japan has been reacting or acting in an overly ready manner. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had this to say to the parliament most recently.
The government has been studying the necessary precaution to protect and evacuate Japanese residents from the Korean Peninsula. Also, the new security legislation now enables us to rescue Japanese residents overseas. We are strengthening the measurements to protect Japanese residents overseas.
Now, immediately, South Korea's foreign ministry called on Japan to refrain from fanning security concerns. What is Prime Minister Abe trying to achieve here, Mr. Hall?
I suspect this is less to do with events in Korea and much more to do with Mr. Abe's approach towards military matters and making Japan a normal country, the term he uses. It's to show that Japan has moved away from its peace constitution to a certain extent. Not that it's abandoned it, but that it's moved on, and that the Japanese can, in circumstances where their nationals are threatened, actually take overseas action, which previous prime ministers did not suggest would be the case. But to suggest that Japan would go in and take people off the Korean Peninsula without consulting South Korea was reckless, to put it no higher. That this is the sort of great fear of the South Koreans and the North Koreans, that Japan's long-term plan is to get back into Korea in a way that it was in the colonial period. I think that's unlikely, but the language used awakens those concerns, just as sometimes Japanese language awakens concerns in China as well. About
yes, the Chinese Foreign Ministry
intentions to.
Yeah. The Chinese Foreign Ministry promptly also opposed the kind of rhetoric or the kind of action to make things much bigger than they really are. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Mr. James Hall, Associate Fellow with the Chatham House, joining us from London. Thank you very much. And here is my point. According to the US administration, the reason why they did not come out earlier to clarify the true position of the Carl Vinson was so as not to show any sign of weakness to the DPRK. That makes me wonder if this lack of transparency can be termed incompetence or deliberate deception to leave such important and apparently wrong information hanging in the air for so long, or both. Is this really the kind of extreme pressure the US has been talking about with which to contain the DPRK? The world simply doesn't know how to react to this vacillations, about turns and downright misinformation we're getting from the US administration anymore. What can I say? I'm just speechless. The National Bureau of Statistics of China recently published a report showing that by the end of last year, the number of people aged 60 and above in China reached over 230 million. That is 16%. The nation's total population, far above the international benchmark of 10% for an aging society. The Beijing Living Will Promotion Association, an influential NGO, estimates that some 150 organizations providing palliative care have emerged in China since 1987, when China's first hospice opened in Beijing. Fewer than 1% of patients in terminally ill conditions can access these services. Well, now things are changing. At the beginning of this year, the Chinese government for the first time officially published guidelines mapping out the standards for the administration of hospices. What changes will these new guidelines bring about? I'm joined by Li Xiaomei, Associate Professor of Oncology Department of the PLA General Hospital. But before the discussion, let's take a look at CGTN's Guanyang's reporting from Shenyang, Northeast China in 2016.
Worst thing that can happen in life is having to see your child suffering from fatal disease. That's the case for the mother of 45-year-old Zhao Yongmei, who is dying of cancer in a hospice care center. Dr. Wang has been running the care center for years. She is the one patients can rely on in their final days. She says Zhao Yongmei is one of the bravest patients because she has accepted the fact that dying is just a part of life everyone has to go through. That belief has made both her and her mother feel at ease. Dr. Wang thinks cultural values about death are the main reason for the slow development of hospice care across the country. The biggest barrier doctors have to break in hospice care centers across the country has to do with the centuries of Chinese culture. Because anything associated with death is believed to bring misfortune, so discussing death openly and rationally has always been the issue. With the arrival of more hospice care centers, people are starting to change their mind about death and dying. China's centuries-old taboo might start to give way.
Indeed, and new government policy is on the horizon. Professor Lee, thank you very much for joining us. Now, the Chinese government, as I said, for the first time, officially published guidelines on the administration of hospices. What are the contents of, or the highlights of these guidelines?
Yes, thank you. I noticed this guideline actually from the WeChat group. You know, the physicians WeChat also have some friends. Doctors,
WeChat, so social media.
Group,
okay.
social. Most of the members of my WeChat group are doctors, physicians, nurses. I think it has become a warm topic recently. Yeah, in my opinion, this guideline is remarkable.
In what way?
Definitely remarkable. I think 2 points should be shared with. First, it conveys a very clear message that palliative care or hospice care is a community or home-based care, not the care that most have been done in large hospitals. Because, you know, in the Western countries, patients with cancer or many other fatal disease died at home mainly. However, it's on the contrary.
In China?
Yeah, in our country, most of the patients died in large hospitals.
So when they become sick, they expect to go to the hospital and get as long as treatment as possible. So what is the what is the second point of these guidelines?
The second point, I think, it is very encouraging, is that it encourages teamwork. That means that if you know a patient such as who suffers from cancer, in the terminal stage, they will have many problems, physical, psychological, spiritual problems. So they need a teamwork, not only our medical physicians, nurses, but also social workers, volunteers as well. Because in this phase, the needs is various, not only just taking medicine. So I think it's quite good.
Why are these guidelines so important for China? I know China is becoming an increasingly aging society. What is the significance of publishing these guidelines at this moment, after, let's say, 30 years, right, since we have this kind of hospice service, on a very small scale?
In my understanding, in the long run, it could be a milestone, because you know you have mentioned during the past 30 years, we did a lot of and achieved agreement and make many consensus, but just limited to academic area. So today, we have the policies, we have the strong support from our government. Things seems much easier than before.
What about the reasons behind the slow progress so far of the development of hospices in China? For instance, we know that the Chinese people have a problem discussing death. Or is that a main reason? That the hospices, not only
many
that.
barriers.
Many
First,
barriers.
I think the lack of training and awareness of medical professionals.
Among the medical professionals?
Yeah, the first. The second should be the barriers of culture and beliefs, as you have mentioned. We Chinese people often avoid to mention about death or dying. Even their family members are in this stage. So cultural and social maybe.
How about the
barriers.
cost? How about the cost? Is it very expensive at this moment for a patient to receive hospice service?
Currently, I think it's not expensive. Actually, it's not a luxury thing. It could save some money if we help the patients with cancer. With hospice care, we will release their pain without many expensive cost. I think
is that
save
reimbursed?
money.
Is that reimbursed? Although small amount, but is that amount reimbursed by the medical insurance
Yeah.
at this moment already?
Yeah.
So
a part of
a part of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
cost is not really a big problem. But China is still
No.
ranking very low in the international ranking in terms of hospices service. For instance,
Sure.
according to a study by the Economist Intelligence Unit, China ranks 81 in some 80. China ranks 71 in some 80 countries.
Yeah,
Why is China
and that
lacking behind so much?
I think the main reason could be two things. The first, the lack of corresponding facilities. I mean that community hospitals or community nurses and physicians. Yeah,
What is
lack
the
of
se-
the
Yes.
facility. And the second, I mentioned the training. We lack many professionals on palliative care. Yes.
So where do you see the future timetable? When do you think we are going to see a leap forward in terms of providing hospices service to the Chinese population?
I think in the near future, the things will change a lot because with the support of our government and the growing awareness of the importance of hospice care, so I think the things will be much easier. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Li Xiaomei from the PLA General Hospital.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Participation of volunteers is an essential part of hospice care. What can they do to help patients, and what qualifications do they need to become a volunteer? I'm joined in the studio by Li Xiao, a volunteer from the NGO, the Beijing Living Will Promotion Association. Li Xiao, thank you for joining us in the studio today. First of all, how long have you been a volunteer, and what has been your main responsibility?
I have been a volunteer for our association for more than 2 years, but the period that I really entered the ward to help the patients is over 1 year.
What is your main responsibility?
In the ward, for most of the time, we accompany the patients and we assist them. But our main task is not only focused on the patients, we also accompany the family member of the patients as well as the patient caring workers. And then we usually provide some service like to help them to wash hairs or to accompany them, just listen to them, to chat with them. And we also, sometimes we get the patients to get involved in our activities, like we do some handcraft events because it's really tedious for them to stay in the ward for a long time.
Is that in a hospital or in a
hospital?
In a hospital.
Yeah, in the ward.
Okay. What kind of training did you get in order to qualify as a volunteer?
As a qualified volunteer to really enter the ward, and we have to accept some trainings. For the first part of the training, it's usually the introduction or the theory part, I call that, because for most of the people, I think palliative care, this is a really new term for many of our Chinese people. And then we have the practical part. During the training, usually the older volunteers will show the people who join the training a sitcom to show what really happened in the ward and how do you cope with the problems. And we also have a technique part or the tip part. I think that focus on the psychological points a lot because we don't have the psychological academic basis, and so it really needs some technical to communicate with the patients.
Technical training to communicate. What do you think these patients need most at that particular stage of their life?
I think they need to feel to be cared, because sometimes they have been in the ward or at home for a long time, and they only feel painful. So the traditional medical method is to is to help them to release some pain. But actually, the pain is not only exists in their body, as well as in their mind and psychological, and sometimes even spiritually. So I think this kind of things are the things that the doctors or nurses or the hospitals cannot provide.
Mm-hmm. I understand that your organization launched a living will text called My 5 Wishes, and I understand you brought a sample with you.
Yeah.
What exactly is that, and why is it important?
This is the 5 wishes, and it is a living. Actually, it's the living will. It's called living will because you fill out the form not when you are still alive and you know everything in it. The 5 wishes is the wishes from the patient themselves, and the patients gets to know that they have the right to choose what kind of medical service that you want, or what kind of person you want them to help you, or things like that. I think in the past, people don't know that, oh, we have the right to choose. Maybe we only follow the instruction of the doctors and the nurses. But once you fill out the form, I think the doctors and the nurse should do whatever treatment according to your own will. If you refuse to use some like living life support system, and the patients should be respected, because that's their own choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you going to continue being a volunteer in this regard?
Sure.
What have volunteering in this service done to you? Very briefly, 20 seconds if you can.
I think at the first time I do this job, I want to get myself prepared because I'm the only child. But after being a volunteer for a long time, I think it's really the responsibility for the whole society, because we are an aging society. It's really needed.
Thank you very much, Li Xiao, a volunteer from the NGO, the Beijing Living Will Promotion Association. And here is my last point. For the Chinese people, death is a taboo subject. We have a saying here that to live a bad life is still better than dying a good death. That partly explains the cultural obstacles faced by advocates of hospices, euthanasia and other services designed to give the terminally ill a dignified way of dying. The fact that hospices now have come under the radar of the Chinese government is a good sign, and only by addressing the previously unthinkable can the country create the necessary alternatives such services can provide to the aging population of China. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. And you can watch our previous shows on the CGTN channel of YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.